Alright, so picture this as the middle of summer. Not just any summer, but one of those scorchers where the air just hangs thick and heavy even at night. I'm talking about a summer when the cicadas are absolutely screaming, and the only relief you get is that brief, almost magical hour at dusk when the sun finally dips below the tree line, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. That's when the air almost feels breathable. This was a few years back when I was living in this quiet little cul-de-sac just outside of Spotsylvania. You know the type of neighborhood, mostly older folks, meticulously manicured lawns, a general sense of, well, peace. My house was a small 2-story place, nothing fancy, but it had a nice big oak tree in the front yard that cast this incredible shade. And I loved sitting out on my porch in the evenings just watching the world wind down. It was my little slice of calm, but that summer, that calm, it started to fray around the edges, and it all had to do with my neighbor, an old man named Mr. Abernathy. Now, Mr. Abernathy wasn't new. He'd been living in the house directly across the street from me for as long as I'd been there, probably a good 5 or 6 years at that point. He was a widower, kept to himself, and honestly, I didn't think much about him. He was just Mr. Abernathy. He had a perfectly kept lawn, always seemed to be pruning his rose bushes, and waved politely if you caught his eye. Just another unassuming part of the neighborhood tapestry. Until that summer. It started subtly. So subtly, in fact, that at first I didn't even register it as weird. I'd be out on my porch, reading a book or just scrolling on my phone, and I'd catch him. Not doing anything, mind you, just looking. He'd be sitting on his own porch, which faced directly across to mine, and his gaze would be fixed. Not at his roses, not at the mailman, not at the kids riding bikes down the street. It would be fixed on my house, or more specifically on me. Now, again, at first I just shrugged it off. Maybe he was just staring into space. Maybe he was lost in thought. Old people do that sometimes, right? So I'd just wave, offer a small smile, and he'd usually offer a very slight nod in return, maybe even a faint, almost imperceptible smile. But the gaze wouldn't break. Not immediately. It would linger. It was the persistence of it that started to get under my skin every evening without fail. As soon as I'd step out onto my porch, even if it was just for a minute to grab something from my car, I'd feel it. That familiar heavy sensation of being watched. And sure enough, if I looked up, there he'd be, sitting in the exact same spot in his wicker chair facing my direction. His face was always in shadow too, especially as the light faded, making it harder to discern any expression. I started to get this prickle on the back of my neck, like when you know someone's behind you even if you can't see them. It was unsettling. One evening, I remember it vividly. I was talking on the phone with my sister, just gossiping, laughing, normal stuff, and I happened to glance up. There he was, staring. It wasn't an angry stare or a leering stare or even a curious one. It was just blank, unwavering, and it lasted for what felt like an eternity. I remember my laughter dying in my throat, and I mumbled something to my sister about needing to call her back. I ended the call and just sat there, the phone warm in my hand, staring back at him. He didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't even blink, it seemed. Just sat there, a silent, unmoving sentinel. Eventually, I was the one who broke eye contact. It was too much. It felt like I was in a staring contest with a statue, and I was losing. I got up, went inside, and pulled the blinds. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were still on the window, piercing through the fabric. I started making excuses not to go out on the porch. I'd read inside or watched TV. But even when I was inside, I'd sometimes glance at the front window, and if his porch light was on, I could sometimes see his silhouette. Still there, still facing my house. It escalated, or maybe it just became more obvious because I was now looking for it. I have this little patch of herbs in my front yard. Basil, rosemary, mint. I love cooking, so I'd go out there sometimes to snip a few One afternoon, the sun was blazing. I was bent over, pruning some basil, and when I stood up, I caught him. He wasn't on his porch this time. He was standing in his front yard, a few feet from his rose bushes, just watching me. He had a pair of gardening shears in his hand, but he wasn't doing anything with them, just standing there, perfectly still, watching. My heart gave a little thump against my ribs. I gave a quick, awkward wave. He didn't wave back. He just lowered his head ever so slightly, a movement that felt less like a nod and more like a slow, deliberate acknowledgement. And then he slowly, so slowly turned and walked back towards his porch. I don't know why, but that moment felt different, more active. Like he wasn't just observing from afar, but engaging in the observation. I started feeling genuinely uneasy, not scared, not yet, but definitely unsettled. I found myself checking my curtains at night, making sure they were fully closed. I'd walk past my front windows and feel compelled to peek through the blinds just to see if he was there. And most of the time, he was. My friends just laughed when I mentioned it. Oh, he's just an old man, they'd say, probably lonely, doesn't have anything better to do. And I tried to tell myself that. I really did. But the feeling in my gut was telling me something else. This wasn't loneliness, this was something else, something off. Then came the incident with the newspaper. I get my newspaper delivered, and usually it's right on my doorstep. One morning I walked out, and it wasn't there. I looked down the drive, figuring the delivery person might have thrown it a bit far, and that's when I saw it, my newspaper, sitting neatly on Mr. Abernathy's porch, right next to his wicker chair. Now, my initial thought was, okay, weird, maybe the delivery person messed up. But then I remembered his morning routine. He was an early riser, always out there, watering his plants before anyone else was even awake. He would have seen my newspaper. He would have known it wasn't his. I stood there for a good minute just staring at it. My newspaper, on his porch. It felt intentional, like a test or a statement. I hesitated. Do I go get it? Do I just leave it? My logical brain said, go get your paper, it's just a mistake. But the uneasy feeling was screaming, don't go over there. I decided to wait. I watched his house for a while, hoping he'd come out and realize his mistake. He didn't. The paper just sat there, a silent, folded accusation. Eventually, I just went back inside. I couldn't bring myself to walk over there. The thought of crossing that small stretch of lawn, knowing he might be inside, watching, was too much. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but it was a genuine, visceral repulsion. That day, I didn't read the paper. The next morning, my paper was back on my doorstep. No note, no explanation, just back. It made the entire episode feel even weirder, like a game I didn't know the rules to or even how to play. The summer wore on, and my anxiety about Mr. Abernathy became a constant companion. I started keeping my blinds drawn almost all the time. I'd come home from work, hurry inside, and feel a sense of relief once the door was locked. This wasn't how I wanted to live in my own home. One particularly sweltering afternoon, I had my windows open a crack, trying to catch any faint breeze. I was in my living room reading when I heard something. A soft, rhythmic sound. Click, click, click. It was coming from outside, from across the street. I cautiously approached the window, slowly pulling back a corner of the blind, just a sliver. And there he was, Mr. Abernathy. He wasn't on his porch. He was standing in his front yard, right by the sidewalk, facing my house, and he was holding a pair of those long-handled pruning shears. He wasn't pruning anything. He was just standing there, rhythmically opening and closing the shears. Click, click, click. His head was slightly tilted, as if listening, and his eyes, even from that distance, even through the sliver of the blind, felt like they were locked onto my window, onto me. That's when genuine fear started to bloom in my chest. It wasn't just unsettling anymore. It was menacing. The sound of those shears, so deliberate, so sharp, echoing in the still summer air, combined with his unblinking stare, It was a predatory act. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was making his presence known. He was sending a message. I let the blind drop instantly, my hand trembling. I backed away from the window, heart pounding. I went into my kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, but my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it. What did he want? What was this? Was he harmless? Or was this something far more sinister? I didn't know what to do. Called the police. "Excuse me, officer. My elderly neighbor stares at my house a lot and clicks his gardening shears sometimes. They'd think I was crazy." I started telling myself it was all in my head, that I was overreacting. But the cold dread that settled in my stomach was very, very real. The summer was drawing to a close, and I was counting the days until the weather cooled, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd stop his vigil once he couldn't sit outside as much. Then one morning, something happened that made my blood run cold. I woke up, got ready for work, and went to grab my car keys off the hook by the front door. As I reached for them, my eyes landed on the doormat, and that's when I saw it. Resting on my doormat, perfectly centered, was a single freshly cut red rose. Its petals were still dewy, glistening with moisture, and impaled through its stem, pinning it to the mat, was a tiny, rusty, and very sharp pair of pruning shears. Not large ones like the ones he'd been clicking in his yard. These were small, almost delicate, but undeniably sharp. The kind you'd use for meticulous, precise cuts. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't touch it. I just stared, my mind reeling. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a coincidence. This was him, and the message was terrifyingly clear. He hadn't just been watching. He had been here, on my porch, while I was asleep. The sheer audacity, the quiet violation of my personal space sent shivers down my spine. And the shears, the connection to his constant presence, the chilling sound of them clicking, it was a threat, undeniable. My hands were shaking so violently that I fumbled with my phone. I didn't call the police. I called my brother. He lived about an hour away, and I knew he'd understand. He was always the calm one, the rational one. "Get out of there," he said immediately, his voice uncharacteristically grim once I explained. "Right now. Pack a bag, come stay with me. We'll figure this out." I didn't argue. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed a small duffel bag, threw in some clothes, my laptop, my toothbrush. I didn't even bother to close the blinds. I just wanted out. As I opened my front door, ready to make a break for my car, I paused. My eyes, almost instinctively, darted across the street. Mr. Abernathy's porch was empty. His front door was closed. But then, as I quickly walked down my pathway, my eyes swept across his front window, the one that faced directly onto my house. And in the faint reflection of the morning sun, I saw it, or rather, I felt it, a faint movement, a shadow, a presence. I didn't look directly. I just got in my car, fumbled the key into the ignition, and sped away from that house, from that cul-de-sac, from Mr. Abernathy, as fast as the speed limit would allow. I never went back to that house alone. My brother came with me later that week, and we packed up my things. He even went over and knocked on Mr. Abernathy's door just to see. No answer. We saw the rose and the shears were still on my doormat. We left them there. My brother took pictures. I ended up breaking my lease and moving to a different town altogether. I never saw Mr. Abernathy again. I don't know what happened to him. If he's still there, still watching the empty house across the street. If he ever placed another rose on another doormat. But even now, years later, when summer rolls around and the cicadas start their incessant chirping, I still find myself checking my blinds before bed. And sometimes when I'm out in my own garden, pruning my own plants, I'll hear that faint, phantom click, click, click of unseen shears, and I'll remember the chilling, silent vigil of the perennial watcher and the single red rose that marked the summer I lost my peace. Story 2, The Boy Who Wasn't There. This happened to a good friend of mine, Mark, back when he was just a kid, probably around 10 or 11. It was one of those endless summers in the late 90s. The kind where you leave the house after breakfast and don't come back until the streetlights flicker on. No cell phones, no internet, just bikes, scraped knees, and the boundless freedom of suburban exploration. Mark lived in a pretty typical neighborhood in Richmond, Virginia. Brick ranch houses, mature trees, sidewalks perfect for skateboarding. His street backed onto a wooded area, not a massive forest, but enough of a patch of dense trees and overgrown brush to feel like an adventure for a kid. It had a small, murky creek running through it, and a couple of trails worn by years of neighborhood kids, dogs, and occasional deer. That summer, a new family moved in next door to Mark. The house had been empty for a while. An old lady had passed away, and it had taken ages to sell, so there was a lot of excitement when the moving trucks finally showed up. Mark, being a curious kid, was out there immediately, watching the whole operation. The family was the Millers, a mom, a dad, and a kid, a boy, Mark's age, maybe a little younger. This was huge, a potential new friend right next door. Mark was stoked. He tried to say hello that first day, but the parents were busy, and the boy was nowhere to be seen for most of the unpacking. The next day, though, Mark was out in his backyard, practicing tricks on his BMX, and he saw the new kid in the Miller's yard. He was sitting on their porch swing, perfectly still, just watching. Mark, being the outgoing type, waved and yelled, "Hey, you new here?" The boy didn't wave back. He just tilted his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, and kept staring. "I'm Mark." Mark tried again, pushing his bike closer to the fence that separated their yards. "Want to ride bikes later?" Still nothing. The boy just sat there, quiet, unmoving. He had pale skin, dark hair that looked a little too long, falling over his eyes, and he was wearing a long-sleeved gray shirt, even though it was already blazing hot. Mark thought that was a bit weird, given the humidity. Eventually, Mrs. Miller came out and called the boy inside. "Simon, time for lunch," she said, her voice a little strained, like she was tired. The boy, Simon, just slowly slid off the swing and disappeared inside without a word. Mark shrugged it off. Maybe Simon was shy, new to the neighborhood, new school coming up. It was a lot. Kids could be weird. Over the next few days, Mark tried again. He'd see Simon occasionally. Sometimes he'd be on the porch swing, sometimes he'd be in the backyard, usually near the edge of the woods that bordered their properties. But he was always alone, always quiet, and always just watching. Mark never saw him playing, never saw him with a ball, a toy, nothing, just standing or sitting, observing. Mark's mom eventually said, "Oh, he's probably just a bit of an introvert, honey. Give him time." But it felt different. It wasn't just introversion. It was an eerie stillness, like a doll perfectly posed. The oddest thing about Simon was that Mark never actually heard him speak. Not once. He'd seen Mrs. Miller talk to him, heard her call his name, but he never heard Simon reply. And whenever Mark tried to engage him, Simon would either just stare or slowly, silently turn and walk away. One afternoon, Mark was in his backyard with his younger sister, Sarah, who was about 7. They were playing with the garden hose, spraying each other, laughing, making a big mess. Suddenly, Mark noticed Simon standing at the very edge of the Miller's yard, right where the woods began, partially obscured by a thick azalea bush. He was just standing there, completely still, watching them. Sarah, being younger and less inhibited, pointed, "Mommy, who's that boy?" Mark's mom, who was on the porch, followed her gaze. "Oh, that's Simon from next door. He's very quiet." What happened next, Mark would never forget. As Sarah pointed, Simon, who had been perfectly still, suddenly moved, not like a normal person, but like something on fast forward, or even rewind. He darted backwards into the woods with a speed and silence that made Mark's stomach clench. 1 second he was there, partially visible. The next, he was gone, swallowed by the dense undergrowth without a single leaf rustling or twig snapping. "Whoa," Mark breathed. "Did you see that?" His mom squinted. "See what, honey? Did he go inside?" "No, he went into the woods," Mark insisted, "like really fast." His mom just chuckled. He must be quick on his feet, probably just playing. But Mark knew it wasn't playing. It was too unnatural, too silent. Over the next few weeks, the sightings of Simon became less frequent but more specific. Mark would be riding his bike down the street, and he'd catch a glimpse of Simon's pale face in an upstairs window of the Miller house, just for a second, before it vanished. He'd be outside at dusk and see him standing by a specific tree in the woods, just beyond the Miller's backyard, always at the boundary, always watching. It felt like Simon was less a kid and more a fixture of the property, like an old, silent scarecrow, but one that could shift its position when you weren't quite looking. One particularly hot night, Mark was trying to sleep, but the heat was unbearable. He tossed and turned, eventually getting up to get a glass of water. As he passed his bedroom window, which faced the Miller's house, he glanced out. Their house was dark, all the lights out, but then he saw it, a pale, distinct shape, moving slowly across the Miller's front yard. It was Simon. He was walking with an almost unnerving slowness, his head down, but his gait was stiff, unnatural. He walked from the Miller's front door straight across their lawn, and then he just kept going, right across Mark's lawn. He walked right up to Mark's front door, stopped, and stood there for a long moment. Then, with that same unnaturally slow, stiff motion, he turned and walked back, across Mark's lawn, across the Miller's lawn, and disappeared around the side of their house. Mark's heart was hammering against his ribs. What was that, a sleepwalker? But the way he moved, it was too deliberate, too strange. And why had he stopped at Mark's door? The next morning, Mark ran outside, checking his doormat. Nothing. No note, no strange object. Nothing to explain Simon's bizarre, nocturnal journey. He asked his mom, "Did you hear anything last night?" She just said, "Nope, slept like a log." Mark started to feel a genuine sense of unease. This wasn't just a quiet kid. This was something else. He started actively avoiding the Miller's house, taking the long way around if he was riding his bike. He'd feel a chill even on the hottest days if he thought about Simon. Then one day, Mark and his friends decided to explore deeper into the woods behind their houses. They'd never gone too far before, but they felt brave that day. They followed the winding creek bed, pushing through thickets until they stumbled upon a small clearing. And in the center of that clearing, they found something that made them all freeze. It was a small, crudely built lean-to, made from old tarps, some scavenged plywood, and branches lashed together with twine. It looked like a hidden fort, but not the kind kids build for fun. This looked desperate, or secret. Mark's friend Kevin nudged it with his foot. "Hey, whose fort is this?" They peered inside. It was dark, musty, and smelled faintly of damp earth and something else. Something faintly metallic and sweet, like old blood or rust and something decaying. In the corner, there was a makeshift bed of dried leaves, and next to it, neatly stacked, were several small, empty food wrappers, granola bars, some candy wrappers, and an empty juice box. The kind of stuff a kid might take from home. But what truly chilled them to the bone was what was hanging from the low branch of a tree just outside the lean-to. It was a necklace, a very small, very delicate necklace, and hanging from it was a locket. Mark recognized it immediately. It was the locket his little sister Sarah had gotten for her birthday a few weeks ago. His mom had been furious when Sarah lost it, convinced she'd just dropped it somewhere in the house. But here it was. Mark didn't touch it. He just stared. Simon had been watching them play. Simon had been in their yard. Simon had walked to their front door. And Simon was the only kid who ever went deep into these woods. A cold dread spread through Mark's stomach. Why would Simon have Sarah's locket? Was he just a strange kleptomaniac? Or was it something more? They got out of those woods fast. Mark didn't say anything to his friends about Simon. He just knew instinctively that this was something too strange to explain. He went straight home, and with trembling hands, he told his mom about finding Sarah's locket in the woods. He didn't mention the lean-to, or the wrappers, or the feeling that Simon was connected to it. He just said he found it near the creek. His mom was relieved, but also a little puzzled as to how it got so far into the woods. That evening, Mark was sitting in his room, lights off, watching the Miller's house from his window. He was waiting, and sure enough, after about an hour of darkness, he saw movement. Simon. He emerged from the side of his house by the woods and slowly, silently walked to the porch swing. He sat down as still as ever, but then he did something different. He lifted his head, and his gaze, even in the dim light of the street lamps, seemed to be fixed directly on Mark's window. Mark felt a wave of icy terror. It was like Simon knew that Mark had been in the woods, knew that Mark had found the locket. The next morning, Mark's mom was on the phone looking concerned. Mark overheard snippets. New neighbors. Haven't seen them. No one answers. For a few days now, Mark felt a strange mix of relief and growing unease. Had they moved? Just packed up and left? A couple of days later, a for sale sign appeared in the Miller's yard. And then, the truly bizarre part happened. A few weeks later, another family came to look at the house. Mark was outside playing basketball when he saw them, a real estate agent and a family with 2 kids. As they were walking through the yard, the realtor pointed to the backyard and said something about the woods. And then Mark heard it. The new family's son, a boy about Mark's age, piped up, "Mom, can I build a fort back there? There's already a good spot with some old wood and stuff." Mark froze. The lean-to. He hadn't touched it after finding Sarah's locket. The new mom laughed. "Oh, maybe a previous owner's child. We'll see, honey." The Millers had just vanished. No goodbyes, no forwarding address, just gone. The house went up for sale, as if it had been empty all along, and no one in the neighborhood, not even the postman or other neighbors, seemed to remember a boy named Simon. They remembered the Millers vaguely, but when Mark mentioned Simon, they just looked puzzled. "A boy? I thought they only had a daughter or something. I never saw a boy." Mark tried to explain, tried to describe Simon, the long shirt, the quietness, the way he moved, but everyone just looked at him like he was making it up. Even his own mom, when he pressed her, seemed to draw a blank on the specifics of Simon, only remembering the Millers had a quiet kid. It was like Simon had been a ghost, visible only to Mark, and then had simply dissolved. Mark never saw Simon again. The Millers were never seen or heard from. The house eventually sold again, and a normal family moved in. The woods are still there, but Mark rarely goes into them anymore. He still wonders about that silent, strange boy, the way he moved, the way he watched, the locket, the lean-to. And he can't shake the chilling thought that maybe Simon wasn't just a strange, quiet kid. Maybe he was something that had always been in those woods, something ancient and watchful, who just happened to wear the guise of a little boy that summer. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't really a neighbor at all. Story 3, The Summer of the Vanishing Dogs. This story comes from my old college roommate, Emily. She's one of the most down-to-earth, skeptical people I know, so when she told me this years after it happened, it really stuck with me. This was the summer she learned that sometimes the most unsettling things aren't necessarily ghosts or monsters, but the quiet, methodical actions of another human being. It was Emily's last summer before senior year of college. She was home in her parents' suburban neighborhood in Fairfax, Virginia. It was a lovely tree-lined street full of families, kids playing, and, crucially, a lot of dogs. This was one of those neighborhoods where everyone had a furry companion. Golden retrievers, labs, schnauzers, little fluffy lap dogs. You heard barking all the time, saw people walking their dogs, the whole 9 yards. It was a dog-loving community. Emily's family had a sweet old golden retriever named Charlie, a big, friendly goofball who loved chasing squirrels and napping in sunbeams. The weirdness started subtly, as these things always do. It began with the flyers. One morning, Emily's mom found a laminated flyer tucked into their mailbox. It was a picture of a beagle, looking a bit forlorn, with the words, "Lost Dog" in big, bold letters. It gave the dog's name, Buddy, and a phone number. Standard stuff. Sad, but it happened. Then a few days later, another flyer appeared on a lamppost down the street. This one was for a missing miniature poodle named Daisy, and then another for a border collie named Max. It wasn't just a flyer here or there. Over the course of a couple of weeks, the lampposts, community message boards, and even car windshields in their neighborhood started to be plastered with lost dog notices. It became a bit of a running joke, in a sad way, amongst Emily's family. Another one vanished. Her dad would sigh over breakfast, but the sheer volume of it started to get unsettling. This wasn't normal. Dogs got out, sure, but not this many, and not so consistently. It felt like something was systematically happening. The neighbors were talking about it, whispering at the grocery store, chatting over fences. Everyone was worried. People started keeping their dogs on tighter leashes, checking their fences, being extra vigilant. Emily's mom even bought an extra lock for their backyard gate, just in case. Then the first really disturbing thing happened. Emily was out walking Charlie one evening, just as the sun was setting. They were taking their usual route down a quiet side street. As they passed one of the larger, older houses, Emily noticed something on the meticulously manicured lawn. It was a small, crudely made wooden box, and inside it, resting on a bed of straw, was a dog bowl, empty, and next to it, a worn-out, muddy tennis ball. Emily stopped. She recognized the tennis ball. It was one of those distinctive neon yellow ones that belonged to a Labrador named Gus, who lived 2 streets over. Gus had gone missing about a week ago, and his owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, had been absolutely distraught. Emily felt a chill. Why was Gus's tennis ball in this strange box? And why on this lawn? This wasn't Gus's house. This was the house of a new neighbor. The house belonged to a Mr. Thorne. He'd moved in about 6 months ago. He was a quiet man, middle-aged, always neatly dressed, rarely seen. He kept to himself, never waved, just went about his business. Emily had barely given him a second thought. He didn't have a dog, that was for sure. Emily slowly approached the box, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She stared at the tennis ball, then at the empty bowl. It felt less like a lost and found, and more like a display, a macabre exhibit. She didn't touch it. She just pulled Charlie a little closer and hurried home. The image of that box and the tennis ball burned into her mind. When she told her parents, her dad went over to Mr. Thorne's house the next morning. The box was gone. When Mr. Thorne answered the door, he was polite but utterly unhelpful. A dog bowl and a tennis ball? No, I haven't seen anything like that. Perhaps someone left it there by mistake. His face was unreadable. Emily's dad came back, scratching his head. He seemed fine, he reported. But it was definitely there, Em. The vanishing acts continued. More flyers, more desperate pleas. The neighborhood was on edge. People stopped letting their dogs out alone, even in fenced yards. Kids were told to be careful. Then came the sounds. Emily's bedroom window faced the back of Mr. Thorne's house. It was summer, so her window was often open. One night, a few weeks after the tennis ball incident, Emily was awoken by a faint sound. It was very low, almost a whimper, quickly muffled. Then silence, then another, louder, distressed yelp cut off abruptly. Emily sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding. Charlie, sleeping peacefully on his dog bed on the floor, didn't even stir. Emily crept to her window and peered out. Mr. Thorne's backyard was dark, completely still. She heard nothing more. She tried to rationalize it. A dream? An animal in the woods behind his property. But the sounds had been too distinctly canine, and too distinctly. Cut short, she couldn't shake it. She lay awake for hours, listening, but silence reigned. The next morning, another lost dog flyer appeared. This time, it was a little terrier from 2 streets over named Patches. Patches was known for his high-pitched, excited yaps. Emily felt a cold dread settle over her. She knew with sickening certainty that the yelps she'd heard had been Patch's. Emily started watching Mr. Thorne. She'd sit on her porch, pretending to read, but really she'd be observing his house. He was still rarely seen. He'd leave for work in the morning, always precisely at 7:30 a.m., and return at 6:15 p.m., always in the same car, always parked in the same spot. He was a creature of meticulous habit. One afternoon, Emily was in her backyard with Charlie. It was exceptionally hot, and Charlie was panting, looking for shade. Emily noticed something strange in Mr. Thorne's backyard. He had a small shed-like structure near the back of his property, tucked against the fence line. It wasn't there before, or if it was new. It was a bland, unpainted wooden box, about the size of a large dog kennel, but solid on all sides with no windows. It looked purpose-built. And as Emily watched, a faint sound, almost imperceptible over the drone of cicadas, seemed to emanate from it. A very, very low whimper, just for a second, then nothing. Emily's blood ran cold. She stared at the shed, and then she saw it, a dark stain, almost black against the light wood near the base of the shed. It looked suspiciously like dried blood. Emily knew, absolutely knew, something horrific was happening. The missing dogs, the whimpers, the strange box on the lawn, the new shed, and Mr. Thorne, the silent, meticulous neighbor who kept to himself. She called the local animal shelter, explaining the situation. They were sympathetic, but said they couldn't act on mere suspicion or weird feelings. They needed proof of animal cruelty. "Have you seen him harm an animal?" they asked. "No," Emily admitted, "but we understand your concern," they said. "But we get calls like this all the time. We can't just go raiding people's property." She called the non-emergency police line. Same story. "Without a warrant or direct evidence of a crime, we can't do anything, ma'am." Emily felt helpless. She couldn't sleep. Every night she'd listen, dreading those faint, muffled sounds, and every few days a new lost dog flyer would appear. One sweltering evening, Emily decided she couldn't take it anymore. She had to know. She waited until her parents were asleep, and then, heart-pounding, she slipped out her back door. Charlie, usually a great watchdog, was sound asleep inside, thankfully. She crept to the fence separating her yard from Mr. Thorne's. The fence was old, and there was a loose plank near the bottom. She carefully pried it up just enough to slip through. She was in his yard. The air felt heavy, oppressive, even more so than the summer heat. The crickets were chirping loud in the stillness. She moved slowly, silently, towards the small shed. As she got closer, the smell hit her. It was faint but undeniably there, a metallic, slightly sweet odor mingled with something else, something foul, like a butcher shop on a hot day. Her stomach churned. She reached the shed, her hand hovering over the rough wood. She could feel a faint vibration, a hum coming from inside. It was sealed tight, no windows, just a heavy padlocked door. She pressed her ear to the wood, straining to hear over her own ragged breathing. And then she heard it, very, very faint, a soft, continuous whine. Not a bark, a plea, a terrified, resigned whine. There was a dog in there, alive. And then she heard something else, a rhythmic, metallic thump, thump. Something being dropped heavily, repeatedly, onto a hard surface, and a faint, wet, squishing sound. Emily clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her mind reeled. This wasn't just neglect. This was slaughter. She backed away slowly, carefully, her eyes wide with terror. She had to get out of there. But as she turned to leave, she heard a sound, a quiet click from the back door of Mr. Thorne's house. Emily froze. She held her breath, praying he hadn't heard her. Then, a faint light flickered on inside the house, and she saw a shadow pass by the kitchen window. She had to move. Now. She bolted back towards the fence, scrambling through the loosened plank, heart in her throat. She didn't stop until she was inside her own house, locked door, leaning against it, trembling. She didn't sleep at all that night. She just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The phantom sound of whimpers and thumps echoing in her mind. The next morning, Emily didn't go to work. She called the police again, this time with more urgency, more detail. She told them about the shed, the sounds, the smell, the stain. She told them about the tennis ball, the volume of missing dogs. She was practically hysterical. This time, they listened. A patrol car showed up within the hour. 2 officers. Emily recounted everything. They looked skeptical, but agreed to go knock on Mr. Thorne's door. Emily watched from her window as they approached the house. They knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer. The officers eventually walked around to the backyard. Emily held her breath. They approached the shed. One of the officers tried the door. It was locked. He peered around it, shone his flashlight around. Then they came back. One of them, a burly officer, came to Emily's door. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice flat. "There's nothing in the shed. No dog. No signs of anything unusual. It's empty." Emily's jaw dropped. "What? But I heard it last night. And the smell?" He just shook his head. "The shed is empty. Looks like a regular storage shed. And the smell? Maybe some garden fertilizer? There's nothing there, ma'am. Can't act on speculation." Emily was stunned. Had she imagined it? Was she crazy? The officers left. Emily felt a wave of despair. A few days later, a removal truck appeared at Mr. Thorne's house. Not a moving truck, just a large, unmarked white truck, and a few men in overalls. They spent the entire day methodically dismantling the small shed in the backyard. Piece by piece, it was loaded onto the truck. They even dug up the dirt where it had stood. By the end of the day, the shed was gone. The ground was just a fresh patch of disturbed earth, and Mr. Thorne was gone too. He simply moved. No for sale sign, no goodbyes, just gone. The strange thing was, after Mr. Thorne left, the lost dog flyers stopped appearing. Overnight, as if the supply had suddenly dried up, the neighborhood gradually returned to its usual dog-filled cacophony. Emily never found out what Mr. Thorne was doing. She never got confirmation. The police didn't follow up. The animal shelter couldn't help. He just disappeared, taking his silent secrets with him. But Emily knows what she heard. She knows what she smelled, and she knows what she saw. And even now, years later, when she hears a dog whine softly in the distance, or catches a faint metallic smell on a hot summer breeze, she still shivers, because some neighbors are quiet for a reason. And some summer secrets are best left buried, even if the truth still scratches at the back of your mind like a desperate, muffled cry in the dark.
Side-eye in your closet. Do me a favor. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you'll never miss a tale untold every day.